The first thing I heard, when my ancient memories returned, was a broom arguing with a staircase. "You missed a corner," the staircase complained. "I did not. You left dust beneath the third rail. That dust has historical value." I opened my eyes to find myself standing in the entrance hall of Larkspur Academy, holding a travel case in one hand and an admission letter in the other. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Hundreds of new students crowded beneath floating lanterns, their academy robes still stiff from the tailor. The broom and staircase continued their dispute near the eastern wall. Nobody else seemed concerned. I was Iven Lark, 18 years old, the son of a village candle maker, and the first person in my family to possess enough mana to attend a formal academy. I was also, rather suddenly, someone else. Not completely someone else. I still remembered my parents, our narrow shop, the smell of hot wax, and the time I accidentally enchanted 40 blue candles to whistle whenever someone lied. But behind those memories lay another life. A much older one. I remembered this academy when its western tower had still been under construction. I remembered apprentices painting mana channels into fresh plaster with brushes made from silver grass. I remembered teachers arguing about whether classrooms should have 7 focusing circles or 9. Most clearly, I remembered spending 63 years caring for magical buildings during an age whose methods had since been forgotten. I had not been a grand archmage. I had never fought a dragon. I had been a keeper of inscriptions, a restorer of formations, and according to 3 generations of impatient apprentices, the old man who became unpleasant when anyone spilled tea near a mana conduit. Now I stood in the same academy, almost 900 years later. The entrance hall looked grander than I remembered. The stone columns had been covered in polished marble. The wooden ceiling had been replaced with floating glass panels. Golden banners hung from every balcony. Yet beneath the improvements, I could still feel the academy's original mana moving through the walls. It moved badly. Mana collected beneath layers of wax, soot, polish, paint, and poorly fitted decorative stone. Old channels that had once breathed freely now struggled like someone trying to drink soup through a folded napkin. A group of students passed me, discussing their preferred fields. "Battle flame," one said confidently. "Advanced barriers," said another. "Storm calling," assuming the examiners have any sense. I looked down at my admission letter. Field assignments would take place that afternoon. In my first life, I had spent decades learning the difference between dirt and damage. Dust could be removed, mold could be killed, wax could be softened. Corrosion could be persuaded to release its grip without harming the metal beneath it. The principle sounded simple. Remove what did not belong. Preserve what did. In the ancient era, that idea had been the foundation of inscription care, artifact repair, and formation restoration. In the present era, judging by the enchanted broom still defending the historical importance of dust, standards had declined. A bright chime rang through the hall. "New students," announced a floating silver bell, "please proceed to the field assignment chamber. Students who become lost should follow the blue arrows. Students who become extremely lost should remain where they are until collected." Blue lights appeared across the floor. I joined the crowd. As we climbed the central staircase, my fingers brushed the railing. Beneath several coats of glossy varnish, I felt a thin pulse of familiar mana. An inscription lay hidden there. Not broken. Not erased. Only buried. For the first time since the memories had returned, I smiled. Everyone else had arrived at Larkspur Academy hopping to discover what kind of mage they would become. I had arrived wondering how much of the old academy was still waiting beneath the dirt. Field assignment took place beneath a crystal dome, in a chamber large enough to hold all 300 first-year students. At the center stood the resonance pillar, a column of white stone threaded with silver. Students placed a hand against it, released a small amount of mana, and received a list of compatible magical fields. The most prestigious fields had recruiters waiting nearby. Battle magic occupied 3 tables and had banners. Healing magic offered fruit tea. Formation studies had printed brochures on paper, so thick it could probably stop an arrow. Cleaning magic had one tired-looking woman sitting beside a bucket. I noticed the bucket first. It was old copper, patched twice along the bottom, with a handle wrapped in blue cloth. A small warming inscription had been carved beneath its rim. The woman beside it wore gray robes with rolled sleeves. Her silver hair had been tied into a knot that leaned slightly to the left. She was reading a mystery novel, while the other instructors competed for students. When my turn came, I placed my palm against the resonance pillar. Mana spread through the stone. 5 names appeared in pale light. Inscription care. Material separation. Residue identification. Household enchantment. Cleaning magic. There was a pause. Then someone behind me whispered, "Oh." It was not an impressed "oh." It was the kind of "oh" people used when a tray of pastries fell face down. The examiner cleared his throat. "An unusually focused result," he said. "Is that good?" "It is clear." A few students laughed. The examiner glanced toward the prestigious tables, as though hopping another field might claim me out of pity. Nobody moved. The woman beside the copper bucket turned a page in her novel. "Master Iven Lark," the examiner continued, "your strongest affinity is cleaning magic." More whispers moved through the chamber. Cleaning magic was where the academy placed students who had useful mana but little combat potential. Its graduates cleaned laboratories, maintained dormitories, removed potion stains, purified water tanks, and occasionally rescued expensive carpets from careless alchemists. Important work. Invisible work. Work nobody boasted about during family dinners. A tall student standing near the formation studies table gave me a sympathetic nod. His name tag read Corin Hale. "Bad luck," he said quietly. He did not sound cruel. Somehow that made it worse. "I've had worse," I replied. That was true. In my previous life, I had once spent 11 days removing enchanted moss from a bell tower, while the moss composed insulting poetry about my boots. I crossed the chamber and stopped beside the gray-robed woman. She closed her novel. "I am Instructor Pell," she said. "Cleaning magic currently has 4 first-year students. One is absent because he accidentally purified the ink from his timetable. That seems avoidable. You will find that many disasters seem avoidable after they happen." She handed me a thin handbook. The cover showed a smiling mage holding a sparkling mop. I looked at the copper bucket again. The warming inscription beneath its rim was almost completely buried under green oxidation, yet a steady thread of mana still passed through it. Without thinking, I crouched. "May I?" Instructor Pell raised one eyebrow. I touched the metal and released the weakest cleaning cantrip I knew. Modern students called it dust lift. In my first life, its older name had been foreign particle recognition. The spell did not simply push dirt away. It taught mana to recognize the difference between a surface and what rested upon it. The distinction mattered. I guided a thread of mana beneath the oxidation, lifted only the loose material, and left the stable copper untouched. A narrow section of the ancient inscription brightened. Warmth spread through the bucket. Instructor Pell stared at it. The water inside began to steam. "That inscription has not worked in 12 years, she said. "It was clogged with corrosion." with the Academy's opinion of maintenance. Her mouth twitched. Behind us, another student received an affinity for lightning magic, and the chamber erupted in applause. Instructor Pell looked from the steaming bucket to me. "Well," she said, reopening her book, "at least one of my new students may survive the handbook." She pointed toward a side door. "Cleaning laboratory, 7 tomorrow morning, wear clothes you dislike." As I left, I passed Corin Hale again. He looked at the restored bucket. Then he looked at me. His expression had changed from sympathy to mild confusion. It was not respect. Not yet. But confusion was a perfectly good place to begin. I met Sella right over a bowl of mushroom soup. The first-year cafeteria was warm, crowded, and loud enough to make spoons vibrate. Rain streaked the windows while enchanted kettles moved between tables, refilling cups whenever someone tapped the rim twice. I had just discovered that the bread rolls contained tiny heat charms when a girl in golden-trimmed robes dropped her tray across from me. "You're the bucket student," she said. "I have been called worse things." "I'm Sella." She had amber eyes, short dark curls, and the cheerful confidence of someone who had never considered whether strangers wanted company before joining them. Her robes marked her as a student of light magic. "A prestigious field." She pointed at my gray sleeve. "Cleaning magic." "Yes." "Can you remove soup stains?" "Usually." "Excellent, we should become close friends." She lifted one arm. A brown stain covered half her cuff. "I produced a perfect sphere of light during practice," she explained. "Then I became excited and dropped it into lunch. Light does not normally stain fabric." The soup was involved. I cleaned the cuff. Sella watched the stain rise from the cloth in a neat brown ribbon and fall into an empty cup. "That is deeply satisfying," she said. "It is one of our more dramatic techniques." She introduced me to Mara Venn that evening. Mara studied archive magic, a field respected in theory and ignored in practice. She was small, pale, and so quiet that the library lamp seemed louder than she was. We found her in an old reading corner, surrounded by rolled maps. "Mara knows every corridor in the academy," Sella said. Mara shook her head. "I know every recorded corridor. There are unrecorded corridors. There are always unrecorded corridors." I liked her immediately. Sella placed 3 pastries on the table. "Iven remembers ancient things," she announced. Mara froze. I had not told Sella the full truth. I had only mentioned that I had experienced several vivid memories connected to the academy. Sella had interpreted this as a reason to trust me completely. "You remember the academy?" Mara asked. "Parts of it from a very long time ago." "Spell memories." "Life memories." She stared at me for 5 full seconds. Then she pulled out a notebook. "What color were the original library doors?" "Red." Her eyes widened. "Every restoration guide says brown." "They were painted brown after the red pigment began attracting moth spirits." Mara opened another notebook. Sella ate one of the pastries intended for me. That was how our friendship began. Over the next week, the 3 of us settled into an easy routine. We ate breakfast together before lessons. Sella complained about precision exercises. Mara complained about people who returned maps folded incorrectly. I complained about the academy's habit of applying fresh polish over old dirt. In the afternoons, we studied in the library. Sella's light spells were powerful but unstable. She could fill an entire room with golden radiance, yet struggled to make one small reading light that did not flicker. Mara had the opposite problem. Her mana was delicate and precise, perfect for preserving paper and sensing traces of old ink, but she lacked confidence. She apologized to books when opening them. On our first free Saturday, we visited a second-hand magical supply shop beyond the academy gates. The shop was called Slightly Used Wonders. Its owner sold dented cauldrons, retired practice wands, chipped focusing stones, and enchanted gloves that occasionally applauded without warning. I bought 3 brushes, a copper scraper, a bottle of harmless mold spirit repellent, and a narrow mana lens with a crack through one edge. Sella found a set of light prisms. Mara discovered a box of blank index cards and reacted as though she had found buried treasure. On the walk back, we took shelter from the rain beneath an old covered passage. The corridor smelled of wet stone and lavender polish. Mara stopped near a wall. "This passage should be 12 paces longer," she said. Sella looked around. "Perhaps the map is wrong." Mara looked offended. "The map is from the original archive." I pressed my palm against the wall. Behind the plaster, Mana curved away at an unnatural angle. There had once been a doorway there. It had been covered, painted, decorated with a bronze plaque, and then polished so often that the plaque's inscription had disappeared beneath cloudy wax. I used dust lift, then a softening cantrip. Layers of yellow wax peeled away like thin petals. Lines appeared beneath them. Not letters. Coordinates. Mara held up the cracked mana lens. Sella produced a small, steady light after only 3 attempts. Together we read the marks. Old East classroom route. The words were faded but clear. Sella grinned. Mara clutched her notebook to her chest. I looked along the passage and felt several more sleeping lines of mana beneath the walls. The academy had not lost its ancient rooms. It had simply cleaned them badly. Cleaning magic began with dust. Instructor Pell placed 12 stone tiles across our laboratory floor and covered each with a different substance. Ash, sand, flour, iron filings, dried potion foam, chalk, wax, mold, tree resin, soot, sugar, something green that attempted to crawl away. "The basic spell is dust lift," she said. "Your task is to remove the foreign material without affecting the tile." One student immediately launched his ash into the ceiling. Another polished a tile so aggressively that it became transparent. I failed on wax. That surprised me. I had removed mountains of old wax in my former life, but my current body had less mana, weaker control, and none of the habits built over 60 years. The spell sank too deeply. A thin layer of stone came away with the wax. Instructor Pell tapped the damaged tile. "Memories are not muscles," she said quietly. I looked at her. She did not ask what kind of memories I carried. She only handed me another tile. Again. So I practiced. Every morning, I lifted dust from increasingly delicate surfaces. Every afternoon, I cleaned objects in the academy: windows, old desks, laboratory jars, tarnished hinges, clogged kettle runes, and once an entire suit of armor that sneezed whenever touched. I kept a notebook. Material. Spell strength. Mana angle. Time. Result. Mistake. Adjustment. My progress was slow enough to be irritating and steady enough to be encouraging. After 2 weeks, I could separate flour from sand without mixing them. After 3, I could remove dried ink from glass while leaving painted markings untouched. After 4, I learned to feel the moment a stain ended and the original material began. That was the true heart of cleaning magic. Not force. Recognition. The spell needed a clear answer to one question. What belongs here? Sella joined me for evening practice under the lanterns behind the dormitory. Her light spell still expanded whenever she became nervous. I understand brightness, she said. Brightness is easy. More mana means more light. More soup also means more lunch, I replied. That does not make it a better meal. She threw a practice cloth at me. I taught her to shape light against a cleaned copper mirror. Any wobble in her spell appeared as a distortion in the reflection. She improved because the mirror gave her something visible to correct. Mara helped us search the archives for references to the old Eastern classrooms. She found fragments of maintenance logs, faded floor plans, and a complaint written by a long-dead instructor who believed students should be forbidden from eating honey cakes near active formations. A sensible man. In return, we helped Mara prepare for her oral cataloging assessment. She knew every answer. She simply forgot them whenever 3 professors looked at her. Sella played the professors. I played an impatient clock. Mara practiced until she could explain archival resonance while Sella frowned dramatically, and I ticked beside her ear. Our experiments did not always go well. One evening, I attempted to clean sugar from a tray of pastries without touching the glaze. I misjudged the distinction. Every grain of sugar in the room rose at once. The pastries became naked. Sella stared at them in horror. Mara whispered, "You clean dessert." Instructor Pell, who had entered without us noticing, looked at the floating cloud of sugar. "Write down what you did," she said. "I ruined 12 pastries. You separated one material from another, across an entire room. They were good pastries. Progress often demands sacrifice." Sella collected the sugar cloud and put it back. We ate the evidence. By midterm, my cleaning spells were not powerful. They were precise. I could trace residue through cracks, identify 6 layers of paint without removing them, and follow old wax along hidden grooves. Every cleaned corridor revealed another fragment of the Academy's earlier design. A line beneath a windowsill. A symbol behind a cupboard. A mana channel under a stair. Individually, they meant little. Together, they began to form a map. The Academy announced the first-year control assessment at breakfast. Every student would be required to produce a stable mana thread, guide it through 12 suspended rings, and hold it for 30 seconds. The assessment was basic. It was also responsible for more tiers than the combat trials. First-year mana control lessons took place in Hall 7, a modern practice room lined with white stone and brass focusing rods. The room amplified mana so students could sense their mistakes. At least, that was what it was supposed to do. Instead, Hall 7 had developed a drift. Mana pulled slightly toward the southern wall. Strong students compensated without noticing. Students with weaker control found their threads bending, trembling, or collapsing. Sella discovered the problem while helping a first-year light student named Neri. Neri could barely guide her mana through 4 rings. She practices every day, Sella told us. She thinks she has no talent. We stood outside Hall 7 after lessons while students filed past. Several looked miserable. A boy from water magic had soaked his own shoes. A girl from barrier studies was holding back tears. I entered the empty room and released a fine cleaning thread. Dust moved across the floor. It should have spread evenly. Instead, every particle curved south. "The focusing rods are misaligned," Sella said. "Only by a little," Mara added. I examined the walls. The modern brass rods had been attached over older stonework. Mana flowed behind them in broken, complicated patterns. "This room is fighting another formation," I said. Mara opened her folder. Hall 7 was built 74 years ago. Before that, this area was listed as storage. It was not storage. My old memories stirred. The eastern wing had once contained beginner classrooms designed by founder Astor Lin. She believed basic mana control should be taught through environmental harmony rather than raw discipline. Her classrooms did not amplify mana. They calmed it. Students practiced inside gentle formations that corrected sharp fluctuations and made mistakes easier to feel. Most modern historians considered those formations theoretical. I had repaired 3 of them. There should be an original classroom near here, I said. Mara pulled out the old root rubbing we had uncovered. The sealed passage. We returned that evening with Instructor Pell's permission and one academy key that opened most doors after being threatened. The hidden route began behind a decorative panel. Sella held a sphere of warm light while I cleaned wax from the wall. Mara compared every revealed mark to her maps. We found the outline of a doorway after 40 minutes. It had been bricked over. Fortunately, someone had left a maintenance hatch beneath the stairs. Unfortunately, the hatch was designed for a person much narrower than me. Sella went first. Mara followed. I crawled after them and became briefly stuck because my coat caught on a nail. Sella offered encouragement. Mara offered practical advice. The staircase offered criticism. Beyond the hatch lay a forgotten corridor. Dust covered the floor in soft gray waves. Old lamps hung from the ceiling. Classroom doors stood along one wall, their numbers hidden beneath wax and grime. At the far end, we found a circular room. 9 stone desks faced a shallow platform. Faded silver lines crossed the floor. The walls were dark with soot, mold, and layers of old coating. The mana inside felt weak, but balanced. Myra walked slowly around the room. This is not on any current plan. Sella raised her light. Symbols glimmered beneath the dirt. I placed both hands against the floor. The formation was still there. Not active, not complete, but alive enough to remember its purpose. This classroom taught mana control, I said. Sella's light flickered with excitement. Can we restore it? I looked at the stained walls, cracked channels, buried inscriptions, and centuries of careless covering. Then I thought of Neri practicing every evening in a room that quietly worked against her. Yes, I said. It was a small problem by Academy standards. No monster threatened the gates. No curse darkened the sky. A few first-year students were struggling with a basic exam. Yet to those students it mattered. And this forgotten room had been waiting 900 years for someone to notice. We began with tea. Mara insisted that all serious archival work required tea. Sella insisted that all serious magical work required pastries. I insisted that pastries remain at least 6 paces from the formation. We compromised by setting up a table in the corridor. Instructor Pell examined the classroom the next morning. She walked around once, touched a wall, and looked at me. How much of this can you actually repair? I do not know. Good answer. She gave us 3 weeks and official permission to conduct a supervised restoration project. She also gave us gloves, masks, 2 buckets, and a warning not to awaken anything with opinions. The work was slower than I expected. The inscriptions were buried beneath 9 layers of material. Dust came first, then soot, then wax, then a hard transparent varnish applied during a renovation 2 centuries ago. Beneath that lay paint, mold, mineral residue, old adhesive, and a layer of decorative silver powder that interfered with every detection spell we tried. Cleaning magic was exactly the right field. It was not enough by itself. Sella angled thin sheets of light across the walls, making raised inscriptions visible through shadow. Mara identified which lines belonged to the original classroom and which had been added later. I separated each unwanted layer without damaging what remained beneath it. Our first major success came from a section behind the teacher's platform. I removed a patch of black soot. A silver spiral appeared. Mana moved through it and lit 3 lines across the floor. Sella cheered so loudly that dust fell from the ceiling. Our first major failure came 2 hours later. I softened a layer of wax, and half a wall began glowing green. We ran into the corridor. Nothing exploded. A hidden ventilation charm activated and filled the room with air scented like boiled cabbage. Mara found a note in the maintenance logs explaining that the scent had been added to discourage students from blocking the vents. It worked, Sella said, covering her nose. We marked the vent and continued. The restoration gave each of us a place to use what others overlooked. Mara could distinguish old ink traces by their archival resonance. Her hands stopped shaking when she worked with the walls. She began giving instructions without apologizing first. Sella discovered she was better at controlled angled light than broad illumination. Her thin beams revealed scratches, ridges, and repairs invisible under normal lamps. I improved my cleaning magic by necessity. Dust lift became layer sense. Layer sense became selective release. I learned to send mana through a stain, map its edges, and loosen only the bonds that held it to the original material. The spells consumed little mana. They demanded enormous attention. After 2 hours, my head often felt packed with wool. We spent evenings in the library comparing symbols. Rain drummed against the windows. Warm lamps floated above our table. Sella brought bowls of potato stew from the cafeteria. Mara filled index cards with every inscription we uncovered. One symbol appeared repeatedly. A circle divided into 9 soft curves. I remember this, I said. The old memory arrived not as a vision, but as familiarity. Founder Lin had called it a courtesy wheel. The formation watched the mana of everyone inside the room. When one student produced a harsh surge, the wheel absorbed a tiny amount and distributed the excess through empty channels. When a student's thread weakened, the room returned a gentle pulse. It did not perform the exercise for them. It made the space forgiving enough for them to learn. Modern training rooms valued pressure. The old classroom valued correction. We uncovered 7 of the 9 curves. The 8th ran beneath a cabinet that had been built into the wall. The 9th vanished behind a broad patch of white plaster. When I cleaned the plaster's surface, I found no inscription beneath it. Only a jagged break. Someone had removed part of the original wall. Without the 9th curve, the formation could not balance. Sella's shoulders fell. Myra searched her notes. I stared at the gap. My ancient memories showed me what had once been there, but memory was not material. I could not clean a missing inscription back into existence. For the first time, our quiet project seemed too damaged to save. Then Mara found a reference in a box of uncatalogued renovation receipts. A section of carved classroom stone had been removed from the eastern wing 74 years ago. It had not been discarded. It had been reused as the foundation for one of Hall 7's brass focusing rods. The missing piece of the old classroom was still inside the modern one, and it was the reason Hall 7's mana kept drifting south. The practical assessment was moved forward. A visiting academy inspector planned to observe first-year instruction, and the administration wanted Hall 7 looking impressive. We had 5 days. Professor Delcan, head of formation studies, listened to our explanation with the expression of a man being told his hat had opinions. You believe an ancient classroom formation is interfering with Hall 7? Yes, I said. And your evidence? Mara placed 3 maps, 2 renovation receipts and 9 index cards on his desk. Sella created an angled light projection, showing the hidden stone behind the focusing rod. I presented a sealed jar containing residue from the original silver channel. Professor Delkin examined everything. He was not dismissive because he disliked us. He was dismissive because the Academy had trained him to trust modern formations over household spells and old maintenance notes. "The drift in Hall 7 is within accepted limits," he said. "For strong students," Sella replied. His eyes shifted toward her. "For all students who meet Academy standards." Sella sat straighter. "Some students cannot meet the standard because the room bends their mana." Before Professor Delkin could answer, Corin Hale entered carrying a set of formation diagrams. He was his field's best first-year student and one of Professor Delkin's assistants. Corin studied our evidence. "You want to remove a structural stone from Hall 7 5 days before inspection. We want to return it to its original formation," I said. "That would require dismantling the southern focusing rod." "Yes. And if this lost classroom does not work, then Hall 7 will stop pulling mana south." Corin frowned. He had the irritating habit of making reasonable objections. "The focusing system can be recalibrated," he said. "We do not need a forgotten room. We need better alignment." Professor Delkin agreed to a compromise. Corin would recalibrate Hall 7. Our group would continue restoring the old classroom. On the day before the assessment, both rooms would be tested. The safer and more effective room would be used. The pressure changed everything. Our cozy project became a race. Corin worked with 6 formation students, polished brass tools and academy-grade crystals. We had 3 second-hand brushes, a cracked mana lens, and a bucket that occasionally warmed itself too enthusiastically. Sella grew tense. Her light beams widened whenever she worried. Mara began rereading every note because she feared she had missed something. I pushed my cleaning spells too hard and stripped a harmless patch of paint from the ceiling. Instructor Pell stopped us on the 3rd night. She entered carrying a tray of tea. "You are trying to make cleaning magic dramatic," she said. "We have 2 days," I replied. "Dirt does not care." She poured 4 cups. "Neither do old walls." We sat on the classroom floor. Instructor Pell made us eat bread with honey and explained the formation from the beginning. Slowly, Mara described its history. Sella explained the light paths. I explained each clean channel. As we talked, our mistake became obvious. We had treated the missing stone as the final piece. It was not. The courtesy wheel had 9 curves, but the room contained only 8 visible return channels. The 9th did not belong in the wall. It belonged in the students. The formation was designed to close through the mana threads being practiced inside it. That was why the classroom could not activate while empty. We did not need to restore a machine that worked on students. We needed to restore a room that worked with them. The next morning, Professor Delkin allowed us to remove the old carved stone from Hall 7. Corin supervised. Behind the brass rod, we found a wedge of gray stone covered in grime, adhesive, metal filings, and modern binding resin. A faint silver curve crossed its face. Corin stared at it. "That line is still carrying mana." "It never stopped," I said. He looked toward the southern wall, finally understanding the drift. His recalibration had failed, because the old stone kept trying to join a formation 80 paces away. We cleaned it together. Corin used a formation clamp to release the modern bindings. Sella illuminated the seam. Mara checked the archive measurements. I separated resin from stone grain by grain. When the piece came free, Hall 7's mana settled. The change was small. A candle flame near the wall straightened. Corin watched it for a long moment. "I thought the drift was poor calibration," he said. "It was," I replied, "just not from your formation." He gave me a tired smile. "That is an annoyingly kind way to say I was wrong. I practice on stains." The restored classroom smelled faintly of stone, tea, and cabbage. We carried the missing piece through the old corridor on a padded cart. Corin came with us, along with Professor Delkin, Instructor Pell, 3 administrators, and 12 first-year students selected to test the room. Neri was among them. She looked terrified. The carved stone fit into the broken wall, with less than a finger's width of space around it. Corin secured it using a reversible formation brace. Mara stood beside the teacher's platform with her maps. Sella positioned 9 floating lights around the room. I placed my hands against the floor. The original silver channels were visible now. Not bright. Not grand. Thin lines crossed the stone like careful handwriting. "Begin," Professor Delkin said. The 12 students released their mana. Nothing happened. One administrator sighed. Corin checked the brace. Sella adjusted her lights. Mara scanned her notes. I felt the formation beneath my palms. The channels were open. The stone was present. The students' mana touched the courtesy wheel. But the room still did not respond. Then I noticed the desks. Each desk had been polished for centuries before the classroom was sealed. Old wax filled shallow grooves carved around their bases. The desks were part of the formation. Of course they were. Ancient classrooms had been designed as whole spaces. Walls, floors, furniture, windows, and people all participated. I began cleaning. There was no time for delicate testing. I sent layer sense through the nearest desk, mapped the wax, and released it in one smooth pull. A silver curve appeared around the base. I moved to the second. Then the third. My mana reserve fell quickly. Cleaning magic used little power when applied to a cup or tile. 12 desks, a teacher's platform, and 9 centuries of wax were another matter. Sella understood first. She narrowed her lights and aimed them across the furniture, revealing the hidden grooves. "Left side," she called. "The wax is thicker there." Mara followed the inscription pattern. "Skip the 6th desk. It joins through the floor. Clean the 7th next." Corin knelt beside the teacher's platform. "This edge is sealed with modern resin." He used a formation thread to lift the resin, while I separated it from the silver beneath. Instructor Pell took the copper bucket, filled it with hot water, and began washing loosened wax from the channels. The administrators watched in silence. The students tried to maintain their mana threads. Neri's collapsed twice. "Keep going," Sella told her. "The room is not ready yet." At the 9th desk, my hands began to shake. I remembered doing work like this in my old body, with decades of training and enough control to clean an inscription while half asleep. Now I was 18, exhausted and painfully aware that memories did not replace practice. But practice had brought me this far. Every tile, every stain, every ruined pastry. I knew where my spell ended. I knew what belonged. I cleaned the final groove. The silver line brightened. Mana moved from the first desk to the second, from the desks into the walls, from the walls into the courtesy wheel. 8 curves shone. The 9th remained dark. "Students," I said, "guide your threads toward the center." 12 thin strands of mana stretched across the room. Some were bright. Some trembled. Neri's was barely visible. The threads crossed above the center circle. The 9th curve appeared. Not in stone. In light. The classroom breathed. That was the only way I could describe it. The mana pressure softened. Sharp fluctuations spread outward through the empty channels. Weak threads received gentle returning pulses. Nobody became instantly skilled. Nobody was given power they had not earned. The room simply made their mistakes clear, without punishing them for making them. Neri guided her thread through the first ring. Then the second. At the fourth it shook. The formation returned a soft pulse. She adjusted. Fifth, sixth, seventh. By the time her thread passed through the 12th ring, tears shone in her eyes. She held it for 30 seconds. The room's silver lines glowed warmly around her. Other students followed. A boy who had never passed 8 rings reached 12. The barrier student who had cried in Hall 7 completed the exercise on her second attempt. Professor Delcan stepped into the formation and released his own mana. The room barely reacted. "It gives less support to stable threads," he murmured. "Courtesy," I said, "not dependence." Corin examined the glowing wheel. "So stronger students cannot use it to avoid proper control." "No, it only makes errors easier to understand." The final student completed the exercise. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the old classroom lamps awakened one by one. Warm golden light filled the room. Not dramatic. Not blinding. Just enough to read by. Instructor Pell leaned on her copper bucket. Professor Delcan looked at the restored walls, the steady students, and the thin silver channels revealed by cleaning magic. "I believe," he said slowly, "we will hold tomorrow's assessment here." The visiting inspector arrived at 9 the next morning. By 9:15, every seat in the old classroom was occupied. News had spread. Teachers stood along the walls. Formation students crowded the corridor. Archive staff came carrying notebooks. Several cleaning magic students arrived in freshly washed gray robes and pretended they had always expected something important to happen. The assessment began. Students entered in groups of 12. The courtesy wheel responded to each group differently. It softened sudden surges, reflected unstable patterns, and helped students feel where their control slipped. Pass rates did not become perfect. That would have made the room a fraud. But students who had practiced and struggled finally received useful feedback. Neri passed on her first attempt. When she left the circle, she hugged Sella so quickly that Sella's light spell burst into a shower of harmless gold sparks. Mara presented the historical records to the inspector. She spoke clearly. No apology. No trembling. When one professor interrupted, she raised one finger and said, "I will answer questions after the sequence is explained." Sella nearly fell out of her chair from pride. Corin demonstrated the difference between Hall 7 and the restored room. He openly explained his failed recalibration and the hidden ancient stone. That impressed me more than if he had pretended to know everything from the start. The inspector asked me to demonstrate cleaning magic. I did not produce a shining storm. I did not make the entire room sparkle. I took an old practice ring coated in wax and residue. First, I cleaned half of it using a common forceful charm. The metal became bright, but one shallow inscription blurred. Then I cleaned the other half using selective release. Wax lifted away. Residue separated. The inscription remained sharp. Cleaning magic, I explained, is often taught as the removal of unwanted material. That is only half the discipline. The deeper skill is identifying what must remain. The inspector examined the ring. And this allowed you to restore the formation. It allowed all of us to restore it. Archive magic identified the original design. Light magic revealed the hidden surfaces. Formation studies returned the missing stone. Cleaning magic made the old work accessible. Instructor Pell stood at the back of the room with her arms crossed. She looked almost pleased. Almost. By lunch, the administration had approved the classroom for regular first-year control practice. By dinner, 3 departments had requested inspections of their oldest rooms. By the following morning, the cleaning magic notice board contained 27 work orders. Instructor Pell removed 19. Respect, she told us, often arrives disguised as extra labor. Professor Delkin offered to sponsor a formal restoration group. Myra was appointed its archive coordinator. Sella became its illumination specialist. Corin volunteered as formation advisor. I received a new gray robe with silver cuffs, an Academy restoration badge, and permission to investigate sealed classrooms under supervision. The badge was slightly crooked. I liked it. The Academy did not suddenly decide cleaning magic was the greatest field in existence. Battle students still preferred fire. Formation students still printed expensive brochures. Several people continued to assume I spent my days polishing windows. That was fine. Windows needed polishing. But now, when students passed the old Eastern classroom, they saw first years practicing inside a formation uncovered by a cleaning mage. They saw Neri guiding a steady thread through 12 rings. They saw Mara speaking confidently beside restored maps. They saw Sella holding 9 perfect lights without one of them flickering. And sometimes they saw Corin kneeling beside a desk, carefully cleaning wax from a mana groove, while insisting he was only helping with formation work. On the final evening of the term, rain returned to Larkspur Academy. It tapped softly against the library windows, while warm lamps floated over our usual table. Mara organized restoration notes into 3 neat stacks. Sella organized pastries into 1 untidy stack. Corin had joined us, although he claimed he was only there to review formation diagrams. Instructor Pell sat in a nearby chair, reading the final chapter of her mystery novel. The old classroom had been in use for 6 weeks. First-year control scores had improved modestly but clearly. More importantly, fewer students left lessons believing they lacked talent simply because a room had made their work harder. Neri had begun helping other students practice. Mara had passed her oral assessment with the highest archive score in 12 years. Sella could now create a reading light small enough to float above 1 page. She demonstrated it over my notebook. The light was steady, warm, and only slightly brighter than necessary. Perfect, I said. Nearly perfect. That is usually how perfect begins. She smiled and stole half my pastry. My own progress was harder to measure. I was still not powerful in the way Academy ranking boards preferred. I could not split a boulder. I could not summon lightning. I could not raise a barrier against a charging beast. But I could follow a mana channel through 5 layers of stone. I could separate spell residue from original enchantment. I could recognize the difference between a cracked inscription and one merely hidden beneath neglect. There were hundreds of old rooms in Larkspur Academy. Thousands of walls. Forgotten stairways. Sealed workshops. Dormitory basements nobody had opened in generations. Everywhere I walked, I could feel faint threads of ancient mana waiting beneath paint, dust, mold, soot, wax, and time. In my old life, I had cared for those systems because it was my duty. In this life, I was beginning to care because they had led me to people I did not want to lose. Sella leaned over my shoulder. What are you writing? A list of possible restoration sites. Myra looked up. How many? 43. Instructor Pell lowered her book. No. I have prioritized them. No. Only 6 require structural access. No. Corin examined the first page. The Western practice tower might still contain a pressure balancing array. Instructor Pell pointed at him. You are not helping. Mara quietly added another archive reference to my list. Sella placed a pastry beside my notebook. For energy. Instructor Pell stared at all four of us. Then she sighed the sigh of a woman who had realized her peaceful department was permanently ruined. One room at a time, she said. We agreed. Mostly. Outside, the rain washed dust from the academy roofs. Inside, the library lamps glowed over warm tea, scattered notes, and the people who had turned an embarrassing field assignment into something that felt like a home. I had once believed returning with ancient memories would mean recovering lost power. I had been wrong. The greater gift was remembering how to look beneath what time had placed on the surface. People had called cleaning magic weak because they only saw what it removed. They never understood what it could reveal.